Welcome to the deep dive. So, you gave us the sources, all of it, the articles, the political briefings, even those strange social media
Kind
friends.
chaotic pieces.
Exactly. And we are here to give you the shortcut. Today, we're strapping in for what was, just an absolute roller coaster of a year.
Roller coaster's putting it mildly.
Right. 2025 in Canada. If you felt whipsawed by this year, well, your feeling is absolutely validated. This was not a quiet year.
No, it truly felt like the year the shoe dropped. And not quietly, but with a real bang. Global stability just seemed to fracture, trade tensions exploded almost immediately, and Canada was forced to confront this new reality that its decades-long relationship with the United States was just fundamentally altered.
And that's really the core of what we're looking at today, this idea of strategic independence. So our mission is to try and connect all these turbulent events into one coherent story for you. We'll cover three big themes. First, the new political regime under Prime Minister Mark Carney and that sudden aggressive trade war that really forced everything to change. Second, how Canada's pivoting. Not just globally with trade and critical resources, but also at home with expanded CRA powers and some huge Supreme Court cases on the horizon.
Right.
And finally, we'll get to the social flashpoints. The moments that, despite all the chaos, still got everyone's attention, from massive labor strikes to that infamous BC ostrich farm saga. Okay, so we have to start with just sheer speed of the political change. It felt dizzying.
It really was.
Justin Trudeau steps down in January because of just awful poll numbers. Mark Carney takes over the leadership in March, and by April 28th, he's won a minority government. How did that happen so fast? What let him pull the Liberal Party back from what looked like the brink?
Well, it was all about strategic framing. He didn't run on, policy details. He centered the entire campaign on a high-stakes, unified defense against an external threat, specifically anti-Trump rhetoric.
That Canada Strong slogan.
Exactly. And the official Elbows Up campaign. It's just instantly connected with this undercurrent of voter anxiety.
I have to say, that campaign ad with Mike Myers,
Okay.
the one where he's dressed as a beer league hockey player telling the U.S. to take off, that was a stroke of political genius, regardless of where you stand.
It was incredibly effective. It just cut through all the noise. It reframed the election from being about, a critique of the Liberals' performance to a simple binary choice about national defense.
And the results speak for themselves.
They do. We saw voter turnout of nearly 70%, levels we haven't seen in years. And crucially, 85% of ballots went to either the Liberals or the Conservatives. The sources suggest Carney's personal dynamism just concentrated the political center like never before.
Okay, I get the anti-Trump angle, but wasn't it incredibly risky to run a campaign based purely on antagonism? The country was already so polarized.
It was a huge gamble, but it paid off because the threat wasn't abstract. It was immediate and it was real. The U.S. president announced America First on January 20th. By March, sweeping tariffs were already hitting key Canadian industries.
Steel, aluminum, auto.
Right, copper, lumber. Carney won the election while Canada was already under fire.
And those tariffs just kept getting worse.
They did. They were boosted to a really punitive 35% in August. Carney tried to de-escalate. He moved aggressively, suspended the digital sales tax, tightened border security, dropped most of Canada's own retaliatory tariffs.
He even boosted defense spending, right, to appease U.S. demands.
A dramatic boost, but it just didn't work.
So what was the breaking point?
The talks completely stalled in October. And according to the sources, the final trigger was surprisingly petty. The U.S. president took personal offense at an Ontario-sponsored TV ad. It quoted Ronald Reagan criticizing tariffs.
Wow.
Yeah. It just became clear this wasn't about rational trade negotiation. It was personal.
So the consensus is pretty sobering then.
It is. The foundational security and, the predictability Canadians always relied on from their neighbor, it's just gone. The long-term analysis concludes that North America is now behaving like 3 countries going our own separate ways.
Okay, so if that core relationship is fractured, Canada has no choice but to pivot. That means trade diversification, especially in the Indo-Pacific, went from being a policy goal to a full-blown emergency in 2025.
Precisely. The volatility was astronomical. The tariffs aimed at Asian trade partners were, depending on the sector, somewhere between 20 and 40%.
That's unsustainable.
Completely. That level of uncertainty just forced Canada and its partners to accelerate everything, to build insulation from these great power struggles, whether it's U.S. protectionism or Chinese economic coercion.
So this wasn't just about finding more trading partners. It was about building a new strategic architecture that bypasses Washington and Beijing.
That is the key insight. The focus shifted entirely to trade blocs that exclude the two big powers, like the CPTPP,
Hmm.
and also smaller, more agile things like Singapore's future of investment and trade partnership.
So minilateralism instead of multilateralism.
That's a great way to put it. If multilateralism is this huge, slow bus everyone's fighting over,
Mm-hmm.
minilateralism is a handful of nimble speedboats that actually get you somewhere.
And Canada was definitely on the water this year. What kind of concrete progress did they make?
It was substantial. They wrapped up the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement with Indonesia. They launched free trade talks with the Philippines and Thailand, made huge strides on Canada-ASEAN FEF, and this is a big one, restarted trade talks with India.
It's not just about markets, it's about supply chains.
Exactly. Forging resilient supply chains with like-minded democratic partners.
And this is where it gets really interesting because modern manufacturing's vulnerability comes right into focus. Critical minerals.
Hmm.
The sources frame China's control over these resources as a geopolitical weapon. They control, an average of 70% of refining capacity?
For 19 of the 20 most important critical
Yes.
minerals, yes.
Yes.
And they used that weapon in 2025. On October 9th, Beijing just banned the export of key rare earth elements and high-performance magnet materials.
Which are vital for everything.
Everything. EVs, advanced aircraft, medical tech. It's a direct threat to allied manufacturing.
Is that threat immediate, or is this China playing the long game?
It's both. It creates instant instability, but it also forces the allies to invest heavily in self-sufficiency, which, China knew would happen. The allied response came pretty quickly. The G7 Critical Minerals Action Plan in Kananaskis, Alberta in June, Australia, Japan, South Korea, India, they all endorsed this framework for shared standards.
And this is where Canada becomes indispensable.
Absolutely. Our long-term influence now depends on leveraging our strengths in upstream extraction and midstream processing to become the reliable non-China source that the world needs.
And we're seeing this shift away from the old structures everywhere.
Yeah.
The sources point to the pretty disappointing COP30 conference as an example of traditional multilateralism just not working.
Right. We're moving toward partnerships based on necessity. Beyond resources, we saw a new trilateral framework between India, Canada, and Australia on tech and innovation. And Canada deepened defense ties with South Korea, the Philippines, and Indonesia.
It's strategic hedging.
In action.
This new era of independence and, frankly, aggressive protectionism, it all needs serious funding. Which brings us to the domestic compliance environment. Now, the Carney government scrapped some controversial policies like the capital gains hike and the carbon tax. But the Canada Revenue Agency was quietly handed a massive expansion of its audit power.
That's the classic carrot and stick, isn't it?
Yeah.
The government looks business-friendly by reversing those tax hikes. But the legislative draft that came out at the same time drastically expands the CRA's reach. They can now require taxpayers to give information under oath.
Under oath.
Under oath. They can impose financial penalties for not complying with information requests, and, this is crucial, they can pause the normal limitation period for reassessment if you're not complying.
So let's talk about what this means for, say, a multinational company in Canada. It's not just about procedure. It also changes how auditors interpret tax avoidance.
Exactly. We're moving into a much more expansive audit environment. The general anti-avoidance rule now explicitly requires them to consider economic substance. So auditors are now looking beyond just the written terms of a contract. They're asking, does this transaction make sense economically, apart from the tax savings?
So if your company structured a deal for maximum tax efficiency, but it looks a bit convoluted, without the legal paperwork, you're now much more vulnerable.
Significantly more. And that philosophy extends to international operations with the new transfer pricing legislation. The proposed law will now focus on the parties' actual conduct and analysis of economically relevant characteristics.
It's a clear signal. They're going to look past the paperwork to see how the business actually operates.
It's basically an open invitation for expansive audits targeting cross-border money flows.
Given all this upheaval, the courts are going to be very busy in 2026. We've got some key guidance coming from the Supreme Court that could affect pretty much every taxpayer in Canada, starting with the Bank of Nova Scotia case, the BNS case.
Right. This is a really high-stakes case. It focuses on a kind of legal Twilight Zone scenario, the so-called phantom tax debt.
Okay, wait. A phantom tax debt. So the CRA is charging interest on money the taxpayer never actually owed. How does that even work?
It happens during a multi-year audit. Interest accrues daily on the potential tax debt. Then at the end of the audit, a loss or a deduction is applied, and it instantly nullifies the main tax liability. But the CRA still claims the taxpayer is liable for all the arrears interest that built up over those years. If the Supreme Court sides with the CRA, it fundamentally changes how interest is calculated during any long audit for any Canadian taxpayer.
That would be a seismic shift.
Right.
What about on the international side?
We have two major cases. Husky Energy, which deals with beneficial ownership under the Canada-Luxembourg Tax Treaty. The Supreme Court has to clarify the legal test for who the true beneficial owner of a dividend is.
And that has huge international relevance.
Widespread. It dictates how much tax is paid on cross-border investment, affecting structures for multinationals everywhere. And then there's Grannon, which asks if certain trusts still qualify as mutual fund trusts when their distributions were deemed unlawful. So yeah, the ripple effects will be felt across every major industry.
So this whole push for a Canada Strong vision requires immense resources. But let's look at where the Budget Acts actually fell at home. We saw these historic political achievements for the Indigenous community, but that was sharply contrasted by some severe budget cuts and a pretty stinging lack of progress on basic services.
It was a year of stark contrast, politically incredible progress. We saw 12 Indigenous people elected as MPs, the highest number in history, and 3 were appointed to Carney's cabinet. Most notably, Mandy Golmaski, a Cree leader, became Minister of Indigenous Services.
The first time that department has been led by a First Nations person.
The first time ever. That level of representation is just crucial.
But the progress on structural issues remains, heartbreakingly slow. The MMIWG crisis was spotlighted again this year with the renewed focus on landfill searches in Winnipeg.
Absolutely. We had the identification of remains at the Prairie Green landfill, victims of confessed serial killer Jeremy Skibicki. And then the new search began in December at the Brady landfill for Ashley Shingoose and Tanya Nepinak. It just underscores the urgency of this crisis.
And then the government's accountability was slammed by the Auditor General, Karen Hogan. What did her report highlight?
She gave a scathing assessment. She concluded the federal government has made unsatisfactory progress on providing safe drinking water and ensuring adequate emergency services to First Nations communities.
Especially with climate threats like wildfires.
Yes, she pointed specifically to persistent barriers to equitable outcomes.
That report is just so alarming when you put it next to Carney's first budget, which cut the two Indigenous ministries by a combined $2.3 billion.
It creates a major tension. On one hand, you have historic high-level political representation. On the other, the funding needed for sustained structural change was immediately curtailed. It just shows that difficulty in balancing these aggressive economic projects with essential social investment.
Okay, shifting to a brighter note, 2025 was a fantastic year for Indigenous arts and culture. A lot of mainstream attention.
A huge year for recognition. The Snotty-Nosed Rez Kids from Haisla Nation won Rap Album of the Year at the Junos for Red Future.
Fantastic album.
Really is. And Elizabeth, who is Inuk, won Best Adult Alternative Album for Inuktitut.
Where she performs covers in her language. Beautiful.
So powerful. Inuit filmmaker Zacharias Kunuk won Best Canadian Feature Film at TIFF. And the musical Bear Grease, the Indigenous spin on Grease, it's still a runaway success, touring North America after a great off-Broadway run. A wonderful cultural story amidst all the turbulence.
All right, now for the stories that, despite all the global chaos, had us completely glued to our screens. We have to talk about the BC ostrich farm saga. A local agricultural dispute that somehow attracted international political intervention from people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Dr. Mehmet Oz.
You cannot make this up.
You can't.
It was an utterly bizarre, months-long legal spectacle. So, Universal Ostrich Farms in Edgewood, BC, gets hit by avian flu, H5N1, at the end of 2024. Dozens of birds died, and the CFIA issued a cull order for the rest of the flock.
And the farm immediately sued, arguing that these birds had rare and valuable genetics. But why did U.S. celebrities get involved in a BC agricultural law fight?
It became a cause célèbre for certain activist groups who claimed government overreach. They just latched onto the farm's claims about the birds' unique genetics. The legal battle went all the way up to the Supreme Court multiple times. The end was tragic. It came on November 7th.
The courts refused the final appeal.
And the cull proceeded. Over 300 ostriches were shot inside a large enclosure while protesters were held back. The intensity got so high the RCMP had to investigate credible threats of violence against local businesses that were helping the CFIA.
Just a bizarre microcosm of the year's social anxiety.
Totally.
Moving to more conventional economic anxiety, we saw major labor disruption.
We did. Canada Post workers walked off the job on September 25th. That caused major headaches until a deal was reached in late November. And separately, about 10,000 unionized Air Canada flight attendants went on strike in mid-August, right in the peak travel season.
Crippling. And a really major public health setback that shocked a lot of people. Canada lost its measles-free status in November.
After nearly 30 years.
Yeah.
A deeply regrettable moment. Public health officials attributed it to the widespread proliferation of health misinformation and disinformation. Just a tangible cost of online chaos.
Okay, finally, let's hit the pop culture moments. The ones that were so huge, they almost feel like they happened a decade ago because the pace of 2025 was just so relentless. We have to start with Beyoncé.
She dominated. She became the first Black woman to win Best Country Album for Cowboy Carter, and she also took home Album of the Year, the first Black woman to win that in 2 decades.
Just a historic cultural force.
Absolutely.
And the Drake versus Kendrick Lamar legal drama that played out in real life.
Right. Drake sued UMG over the promotion of Kendrick's diss track, Not Like Us. It was dismissed in October. The judge basically ruled the lyrics were non-actionable opinion.
A quick end to that chapter.
A very quick end.
And the Canadian celebrity crossover that broke the internet. Katy Perry took a commercial trip to space on April 14th and then started dating Justin Trudeau later in the year. If someone had told me that in January, I would have thought they were writing bad science fiction.
It was an unbelievable pairing that felt perfectly in line with the surreal absurdity of 2025. We also saw the K-pop group Cat's Eye's Better in Denim Gap campaign go instantly viral. And of course, the sudden, massive explosion of the Labubu craze in the U.S.
And to cap it all off, a high-profile criminal anomaly. The Louvre heist on October 19th. Thieves stole 8 crown jewels in under 8 minutes.
With a truck-mounted electric ladder and angle grinders.
Straight out of a movie. Prompted a lot of criticism about outdated museum security across Europe. So 2025 was defined by the speed of change. A snap election, a new government, the collapse of that bedrock U.S.-Canada trade relationship, and this unprecedented legal scrutiny that's looming for Canadian taxpayers and multinationals. It was really the year Canada was forced to stand on its own feet.
I think what 2025 really synthesized was the absolute necessity of resilience. Canada and its Indo-Pacific partners were forced, really, to strategically and economically decouple from great power volatility. The aggressive pursuit of multilaterals, accelerating trade agreements, the focus on critical mineral supply chains. It all points toward building a more independent, robust future, driven entirely by necessity.
It really sets the stage for a dramatic 2026.
Indeed. And here's the final thought for you to chew on. While the new Carney government prioritized economic signaling by pivoting away from policies like the carbon tax and capital gains hike, the Auditor General's report and those immediate deep budget cuts to Indigenous services underscored that some of the most persistent structural challenges are still fundamentally unresolved.
So the question becomes,
how will the Carney government balance its aggressive push for Canada's strong economic projects, like fast-tracking pipelines, with the rising tide of domestic opposition and the explicit demands for equity and environmental stewardship from its First Nations partners? That tension between economic independence and necessary domestic equity is what will define the next chapter for you to follow.